I've been taking some time lately to look back on my career as a documentary filmmaker and all the amazing things it's allowed me to experience. This job has taken me so many places, from the coastal mountains of Canada to the tops of volcanoes in the South Pacific to the heroin fields of Mexico, and so much more. For someone like me who spent a good part of my life as a traveler and wanting to see as much of the world as possible, making documentaries has given me opportunities that I never would have dreamed of. And that's what I want to talk about today. Why, of all the different parts of the film industry, I chose to make documentaries, how it's changed my life in some amazing ways, and why it could be a great fit for you too. For the right kind of person, I truly believe that making documentaries is the best job in the world. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why. Hey guys, welcome back, and if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, documentary cinematographer and filmmaker, and on this channel I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working in the documentary, photography, and film industries. Documentary is the weird, unwanted stepchild of the filmmaking industry. It isn't as high paying as the commercial world, and if you're looking to make a huge name for yourself, Hollywood is probably a better choice. But before you rush to click off this video to find out how to get into those sectors instead, there's some great things that working in docs can bring to the table that even the most famous DPs or richest commercial guys would probably be jealous of. So let's get into it. My path into video production wasn't straightforward at all. I didn't go to film school, and I wasn't born knowing that making documentaries was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I spent most of my 20s just traveling to different countries as a backpacker, trying a lot of different things, and it wasn't until relatively late in my life that I picked up a camera seriously. I mean, I planted trees for 6 years, I worked on farms, I picked fruit, I crewed on sailboats, I taught English in South Korea, all things that are totally unrelated to video production. For most of my life, I wasn't interested in jobs, I was interested in experiences. I wanted to learn about the world and test myself in difficult situations. I wanted to understand how other people lived and see ways of life that were totally different to the way I grew up in small town Canada. And I'm guessing that if you're watching a video about becoming a documentary filmmaker, you're probably pretty interested in the world as well. I traveled full time for almost 4 years, working odd jobs to keep me going and spending as little money as possible. I learned a lot, and I would never trade that for anything, but as a backpacker, I could never get as deep into other cultures as I wanted. I idolized photo stories in National Geographic and Time magazine and places like that, where the journalists would embed themselves with their subjects and spend days or weeks or even years getting as close to their stories as possible. And traveling lets you scratch the surface of that itch of people and cultures, but because you don't have a real reason to spend time there, I always found that it was hard to get to that next level of connection and understanding. With documentary photography and filmmaking though, that problem disappeared. When I started working for newspapers like the New York Times, it not only gave me a reason to be in those places, but it gave me access. Odds are, if you approach a random person in the street and ask them if you can just spend a day with them because you want to learn what their life is like, they're going to look at you like you're a crazy person. But if you have a camera in your hands and explain that you're making a documentary project, suddenly there's a reason for you to be there, and believe it or not, it changes the relationship completely. I'm not saying that everyone's going to say yes, because a lot of people won't, but I found it so much easier to be openly curious about people's lives with a camera. Even when I didn't have big name newspaper credits or streaming platforms behind me, people innately understood that I was there to document them, and it made the interaction so much simpler to understand. Let me give you an example. My very first serious documentary project was about child labor in Bangladesh. I flew to Dhaka on a one-way ticket and basically just wandered around industrial areas until I found small factories and then walked inside to see if there were children working. Amazingly, once they saw the camera, very few people asked me to leave. Some of that might be due to how polite Bangladeshis are to strangers, but I think that if I just walked in there on my own and started staring at people, awkwardly lurking around without any real reason to be there, the interaction would have been much more awkward. Actually, after about 3 days of doing this, one factory owner came up to me and asked in English what I was doing in his place. I tried to make up some vague description of trying to capture the reality of working life around the world, but he saw through me right away. He looked at me and said, "Are you sure this isn't about child labor?" I figured I was done and was about to be thrown out, but I was trapped and had to admit that he was right. But instead of getting mad, he just smiled and said, "Very good, you will find lots of this in Bangladesh." Now I realize this is a pretty dark scene, and in no way do I find child labor a funny subject. It was a weird reaction, but it does show how open people get to your presence when they know you're there for a reason. This has happened to me again and again over the course of my life as a photojournalist, and now as a documentary filmmaker. When people see that you're interested in their lives and you're there for the purposes of documenting, the doors often open wide and the real learning can start. I call this privileged access. And for me, it's why making documentaries is the best job in the world. When you work on a documentary, assuming the director and producers are good at their jobs too, you get special access to people, places, and situations that you never otherwise would. Let me give you another example. For a long time, I lived in Mexico City, where I worked on a lot of difficult subject matter, particularly migration and the ongoing drug violence crisis. If you've followed the news at all over the last few years, you've probably heard about the huge groups of migrants that used to cross Mexico from Central America, running away from poverty and violence and hoping to make a new life for themselves and their families in the US. Before I got to Mexico, I was vaguely aware this was happening, but it was so far removed from my reality that I didn't have any real idea of who these people were, what they were feeling, or what their experience was like. I'm gonna guess that most of the people on the internet who seem to hate immigrants as well probably don't have any real idea either, but that's a sidebar and I don't want to get too political here. Then one day I was hired to follow one of these caravans from the Guatemala border all the way across Mexico to the border with the US. For something like 46 days, I walked, hitchhiked, and rode trains with a caravan of 1,500 people. I wouldn't say I fully understood what they were going through because of course I was in a different position. I had a passport and could just fly away if things ever got too rough. And don't get me wrong, I know I wasn't really going through the same thing that they were, but even so, it made me so much more aware of what it means to have to flee your home, to leave your family behind, and cross an entire country so you can hopefully give your children a better life. It really put my own privilege into perspective and just how lucky I got to be born into a middle-class life in a safe part of the world. It's possible to get some of this knowledge from books or school, but experiencing something like that firsthand is just so powerful. And I don't think I'd ever have gotten to do something like that if I weren't there to document. The camera was my reason for being there, and it was also the reason people accepted my presence so easily, and why they were willing to answer all my questions. That's the definition of privileged access. I've enjoyed privileged access again and again over the course of my career. I got to travel up the entirety of the Mekong River for 2 years, stopping all along the way and learning how the river impacted people's lives. Because of that, I now understand how small changes to an ecosystem or environment, like a dam or a power plant, can impact the lives of millions of people far away. I learned firsthand what drug cartels are really all about and how things like fentanyl and heroin are made. Spoiler alert, it's much more complicated than just a bunch of bad guys making dangerous products. It's about poverty, lack of opportunity, corruption, and so much more. And I never would have understood any of this if it weren't for the privileged access this job has given me. I could go on, but I think you get the point, and I don't want this to come off as me bragging about all the cool stuff I've done. What I'm really trying to get across here is that making documentaries has totally transformed the way I look at the world. Looking back at what I thought I understood as a young backpacker and how I see things now after over a decade of privileged access to some seriously amazing people and places, I don't think there's a better job out there, for me anyways. It might not pay quite as well as commercials or make you super famous like Hollywood can, but if you're anything like me and you're more interested in experiences and learning about the world, documentary filmmaking is an amazing thing to dedicate your life to. Hopefully this video has helped motivate you to get your own filmmaking or photography career going, or for those of you who've already started, I hope you're getting as much out of this job as I am. Let me know what kinds of privileged access you've gotten through your work in the comments below. And if you like this video, check out this other one about how the COVID lockdowns made me a better filmmaker. See ya.